So it will just be the original for this today? Or is it one?
Hello, folks. Very nice to have everyone here.
So,
Sorry.
That's okay.
yeah.
Fellowship's
That was just
good.
a happy thought.
Would
When
you
you
say-
had that thought, like,
Yeah.
just the original or?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, they're not here this morning.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, they'll be at the reception.
Okay.
And for those who are joining us this week, we're in Ruth chapter 2. If you remember, we did all of Ruth 1 and a nice break of a book after the book of Judges, which is full of a lot of folks doing wrong things. And so if you remember the time of the Judges, we talked about this last week, but I thought I'd write it up finally after a great effort. It's about 325 years of period right before Saul, right? 1050 is when Saul becomes king, and then you had that 40 years for Saul, 40 years for David, 40 years for Solomon. That's the United Kingdom where Israel was at its greatest. But we're back here, and Ruth is in the time of the Judges. Okay, we don't know exactly when, but that's kind of the time frame. And if you remember, we're talking about chapter 1 of Ruth, kind of a recap. There's a lot of walking by sight, not walking by faith, really. I mean, if you remember, Elimelech and Naomi, what did they decide to do when things got tough in Bethlehem? Hey, let's go to this foreign country that, does child, sacrifice and, all kinds of sexually immoral stuff, and, we'll hang out with the Moabites because times are tough here. And we talked about, how we can, when we as Christians hit those trials that God allows us to go through, there are three options. One was escape, and that's what they did. One was, to endure it, but not in a good way, which tends to embitter you, and that's what we talked about for Naomi, right? She didn't handle it very well either. And then there's the enlist. I guess they had to stick 3 E words in there, and that was really when you use it to allow God to transform you. And so hopefully we'll see a little bit more of that at this point. But Elimelech and really Naomi when it really comes down to it, they traded one famine for 3 funerals, right? Elimelech passed away, Mahlon, and the 2 boys, Kilian and Mahlon. And then we remember it got even worse because then there was that lost opportunity. That's one of the saddest parts of chapter 1, if you remember, is when Naomi tells the girls, young ladies, to head on back to Moab, and knowing that she has the one true God behind her, and she's basically saying it's better for you to go back to Moab with your false gods than it is to hang out with me, even if we're poor, and worshiping the one true God. And Orpah decided to do that. Thank goodness Ruth didn't. And of course the best, and that was really because she was really focusing on her troubles more than anything. Woe is me. God's punishing me. He's doing this to me. And so, I want you to, you don't need to be around me at this point. In fact, she said, call me Mara, right? When they got back to Bethlehem, it's like, call me bitter. It used to be Naomi, which meant pleasant, so you can imagine she was probably someone very nice and kind then, but she's like, God's done this to me, because sometimes when we go through these trials, some people just focus inwardly, right? Woe is me, I saw my troubles, and then she just got embittered at that point. And so then she was like, call me bitter, call me Mara at this point. And, but fortunately we have Ruth, right? This one confession of faith. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. This is, of course, we're talking to Naomi. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Okay? So I hope I get a daughter-in-law if Lord blesses me with one as good as Ruth, right? Maybe a little on the far side of the spectrum. She doesn't need to be buried with me, but anyways, that's where we were. Any questions about the first chapter?
Just a thought.
Yeah, sure.
So I was behind in reading Wearsby, but I thought he brought up an interesting reflection as to potentially why Naomi wanted the girls to go back. Was to hide the sin of
for her, yeah.
They had not abided in the covenant laws.
Right.
And that if she had brought those widows back with her,
Right.
her kinsmen and people
Even
would have
more so.
known even more so. And that possibly she was trying to hide that fact. And I thought, well, how often do we really do that?
Yeah.
When we know we mess up
Yeah.
and we're already being convicted by it, that then we want to try to
Right.
kind of
Sweep it
brush
under
it
the rug.
under and not let anybody else
Yeah.
know.
Well, I absolutely believe in that second point, that I think a lot of times when we're going through this, and maybe God is disciplining us, I mean, sometimes that is,
Happens.
happens,
Yeah.
right? You know, a lot of times it's just a broken world. And so, you know, when people die and people get sick and, you know, this, that, or the other. But back then, of course, there was more of a mindset is something bad happens to you, you're doing something. I mean, just look at Job, right? You know,
Yeah.
with his 3 friends. And so, yeah, there could be some of that. I would say this, that 2 reasons why I might not think that is because, I mean, they were open enough to leave Bethlehem for Moab. I mean, everyone knows Moab was like their mortal enemies. So, you know, you're already kind of, you know,
In
throwing
the
it out there.
threads of it,
And the
yeah.
second thing is, look how Bethlehem in chapter 2, if you were able to read it this week, how they received them. You know, oh, it's great to have, you know, Naomi, but is this Naomi? I mean, something's happened to her, you know. And also the way that we'll hear Boaz talk about, you know, Ruth the Moabitess, okay, and I'll have a question, but I mean, word spread, okay, and yet people treated them with general, I think, respect and love, and certainly Boaz did, but Boaz is, you know, top notch, right? And so, yeah, so no, you're right. It was a good point. I didn't
was an
really,
interesting
yeah,
reflection.
it was, yeah, but clearly, you know, I don't want y'all to know all the things I struggle with, the things that the sin that I constantly come back to, that I can't knock out. And, you know, for each of us, it's probably different ones. And you know, I'm sure the same, we put on our best for Sundays and Wednesdays and that kind of stuff. I mean, we still should be humble, but we talked about confessing that in James. Remember, it's just confessing your sins when we were in the book of James. And so, yeah, there's ways to do that. You can do that out loud. When I've wronged you, I confess to Melinda, or you can do it publicly. Sometimes you do it privately. I told you my very best friend, I've talked to him about things I'm struggling with and for him to pray for me. So, yeah, I agree. I think at the very least, we should be as honest to God as possible, because a lot of times we're not even honest to Him, right?
Right.
We kind of like, oh, it's really my wife that's causing this to happen, or, you know, my kids, they bring out the worst in me, or, you know, something like that. We're always, you know, rationalizing it for one reason or another. At least I do it. So, yeah, good points. Anything else before we go to chapter 2? Okay, you know, I found this really interesting. The first sentence that he put in chapter 2, it says, before God changes our circumstances, He wants to change our hearts. If our circumstances change for the better, I want you to tell me if you agree or disagree with this. If our circumstances change for the better, but we remain the same, then we will become worse. Let me say it one more time. Before God changes our circumstances, and let me know if you agree or disagree with this, or if you have a position. He wants to change our hearts. If our circumstances change for the better, but we remain the same, then we will become worse. What are your thoughts about that? General agreement, general disagreement, general, I like this part, but not this part as much? Can we all agree that before God changes our circumstances, He wants to change our hearts?
Correct.
Yeah.
Is that a safe softball Sunday school question?
Well, because we could always say, if only this were different, then I would be able to do this better, or I would be more disciplined in this area. If only this were different, you know?
Right.
And I mean, and then things can change. And if you haven't gone under the training of Holy Spirit and you're still struggling, I mean, like, you bring that struggle with you to that new circumstance.
Sure.
So you're only gonna get worse.
Yeah.
Until.
Right.
So I agree.
Well, look at that passed, and so the next one is, if our circumstances change for the better, which I think you could probably argue for or against on this one, but we remain the same, then we will become worse. And I think, you know, as Mandy said, you know, if we just say, oh, that passed, and, you know, I guess I'm okay, so I'm going to go back to whatever I was doing before, you're in a worse position spiritually, I would agree with that, than where you were before. Even the circumstances cut in that put you through that trial, right? I don't know. What are y'all's thoughts? Do you have general agreement, or you take issue with any of that?
I think it could, at the very least, make you indifferent to anything else.
Right.
It may not, harden your heart. It may not make you, or you may not get worse, but you will become more indifferent. Like if if I had $1 million,
Right.
well, then you get $1 million, but your heart hasn't been softened. What are you doing with that to
Right.
be a betterment to your environment, to your community, but instead you're just like, well, now I have $1 million, and I'm gonna sit back and I'm gonna just take care of me and be over here in my corner.
Sure. My concern would be, I went through the trial, he lifts the trial, I don't change, and at that point, I didn't even know what the trial was for. Because
Right.
I didn't change at that point, and so indifferent might be numb, like,
Yeah.
I've been through that before, and I'm like, I'm trying to get your attention, God says to me, and if he lifts it, and I haven't learned why, like James chapter 1 says, you have to pray for wisdom. If you're going through a trial and you don't know why you're going through the trial, pray for wisdom. And if you actually believe you're going to get that wisdom, he'll give you the reason why you're going through that trial.
Right.
Because a lot of us are like, why am I going through this? Why is this person experiencing sickness? Why am I experiencing sickness? Why have I've got death all around me? I mean, why am I, this or that, or, jobs or, relationships? And, if we don't learn it, then, we don't learn it. And we are, there's nothing that's changed at that point, right? And so, yeah. Any other thoughts about that?
I think that, the initial change just needs to be like one of a posture of surrender. But I think a change of circumstances can help the healing process too. Because I'm thinking about, bad company, abusive marriage, all kinds of
Yeah.
things, and how, just a posture of surrender to Father can, is a change in that
Yeah.
initial change. But a change of circumstances, I think, can definitely help give you. I think, we have brothers and sisters that are locked away in prisons and dungeons, and fathers doing all kinds of work
Right.
on them, and their situations are
Right.
awful, So, but I do think a change of environment,
Yep.
can definitely help with the heart growth.
Right. And we'll learn how a change in circumstances, because I want you to think about this as we apply this to Naomi in this chapter, okay? Because that's kind of why I was asking this question. So let's read 1 through 3, and I'm going to give you all kinds of background that you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe Jim even spent that time on there. Could someone read verses 1 through 3?
Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side named Boaz. He was a prominent man of noble character from Elimelech's family. Ruth the Moabitess asked Naomi, will you let me go into the fields and gather fallen grain behind someone who allows me to? Naomi answered her, go ahead, my daughter. So Ruth left and entered the field to gather grain behind the harvesters. She happened to be in the portion of land belonging to Boaz, who was from Elimelech's family.
Okay, so at this point, the verse right before chapter 2, it says that they arrived in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning, okay? That's April to May. Between the barley comes first. Barley was really known for the grain for the poor, okay? It was like every man's, I won't say maybe Baptist church, it may not be. It's like the beer to the wine. The barley to the wheat is like the beer to the wine, okay? And so barley, I probably was easier to raise, maybe less expensive to raise. So I think maybe more people could purchase barley. That harvest happened, oddly enough, around 3 weeks prior to the wheat. And then the wheat was more expensive, I guess, and people who had more means were able to purchase wheat at that point. But so that's where we are in the April to May time frame at this point. And they got to Bethlehem. Naomi and Ruth got to that. So how do you harvest barley? I know you've been dying to figure this out, okay? And so, because I only say this because it's going to totally make more sense when you start hearing things about what Ruth's doing on the threshing floor and how she's doing this gleaning and all that kind of stuff. So let me go through it, and hopefully it won't take too much time.
It might help if you get up and demonstrate.
That's right. as I'm singing, bringing in the sheaves, right? Bringing in the sheaves. So the guys were first, okay? So it's one of those like, I won't say, it was man's work or a woman's work, but usually guys did the general harvesting when the the wheat or the barley was ready to be harvested, they take these hand sickles, right? And they cut the stalks. I guess you'd say, I don't know what barley looks like, but I'll say wheat. Maybe it's the same. I don't know if anyone's ever seen barley. I'm not sure I have. But, wheat stands about that high, right? I guess, ish. And they are, doing it with their hand sickles at this point. And then while they are cutting down the field, women, the second team of harvesters would come and they would bundle the cut stalk, I guess, with the barley. I guess barley's at the end. I know wheat's at the end, right? And they would wrap it up in what they called sheaves. That's why you hear the song, bringing the sheaves. And so then they had these bundles at this point, and then behind them was gleaning, okay? You ever heard me say, what do you glean from that sentence, And so we use it in English in a more figurative sense, but the literal gleaning is from Leviticus chapter 19:9, and it says, this is God's command to the Israelites, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time, or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. Okay, an alien, I'm not talking about, sci-fi aliens. It means the foreigners, right? And so that's who was supposed to pick up the extra, okay? Don't go over a second time and get all the stuff. Like, I would totally be that kind of guy. Like, we got to get every last, bit of it. But they're like, no, you do the first part. The ladies do the big mass, bundling of the sheaves. And then if there's anything left, you let the poor and the foreigners pick up on it at that point. And it's by Levitical law at that point. And that's where Ruth's involved, right? If it says, and it says that, if I may, where does it say? Verse 3, thanks. So she went out and began to glean, okay, in the fields behind the harvesters, okay? So the guys had gone and cut, the ladies had gone and bundled, and then she came and gleaned past that because she was clearly poor and she was an alien at that point. And so then came the threshing. Okay, so what do you do with these bundles at this point? Well, you take it to the threshing floor. And it is basically this flat, I assume like stone and, I don't want to say concrete, whatever they did to make things flat and hard back then. And what they would do in each of these towns and villages, up high in the Middle East, there are a few hours of decent winds in the afternoon, okay? And so they would stick the threshing floor, this hard, and I'm not sure if there was a covering or not. Probably should have researched that. But you put all your bundles, and I imagine you unbundled it and you put it out on the floor. And typically they threshed it with like threshing animals, like cattle or something like that. And what does the threshing do? It separates the stalk, the straw, from the wheat or the barley, okay? And so otherwise you're like, you ever snap beans before, it takes forever, right? And so they put it on the threshing floor, and then the heavy, or if you don't, that's usually how you did it. And if you didn't have an animal, there was a threshing sledge. So you would actually pound, I'm not sure, it was probably wider than that, but you pound the barley and the wheat so that it would separate at that point. Okay, so you've got all this broken up stuff on the threshing floor at this point. What do you do? Because Jim, you talked about this wind thing. Then you do the winnowing, okay? Then you get these big winnowing forks. I get the feeling that they're like pitchforks, but probably wider. And now that everything's broken up, you throw it up into the air. The wind catches the straw part that has been broken off. And the chaff, you ever heard I can separate the wheat from the chaff, okay? Which is that extra stuff on the wheat. It's like the not edible part, yeah, whatever. And that blows off during the afternoons, and then the wheat comes down because it's the heavier object, right? Mm-hmm. And then there was like, what was it? There was like there was something else that was out after that. It was like give me just a second. That's a sifting. And then they kind of did a little bit of less sifting, and then they bagged it up and they sent it to the market, okay? And so that's how they did that. And so, why are you telling me this about the threshing floor? You'll learn about this in just a little bit later, okay? But that's where she is. She's on the third part. She's doing the gleaning at this point once the major harvesting has occurred at this point. And what was Naomi's response when why do you think Ruth said what she said to Naomi? I mean, was there any big meaning behind what Ruth said, or just do you think she was practical and said we got to get that?
I think part of it is she's going with Naomi into her home and with her people. She's
Right.
going to ask, "Can I go do this?
Right.
Is this appropriate for me to do? Can I go do this
Right,
for us?"
because I don't know, the Moabites did this, but the Israelites do this. Right.
Well, and even if your law says that it should be for the foreigners, are these people that are gonna
Right.
be okay with me doing that? Or,
Right.
you know,
Yeah. What are your folks like in Bethlehem? You know these people better than I do at this point. And what does what's Naomi's response at this point?
Go.
Yeah.
My daughter.
Your daughter, yeah. Well, and I mean, I guess the great thing is, I'm gonna, what do you glean from Naomi's response? Is it any? Where has you
Like,
think
why
that?
did she go to?
Well, no. I mean, I imagine we'll find out that Ruth is much younger than Naomi, of course, but she did make it all the way from Moab. She walked all the way from Moab back to Bethlehem, so she was healthy enough for that. But it seemed just kind of a Wearsby brought this up, and maybe
Response.
what's that?
A depressed response.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I don't think she's gotten out of the bitter phase yet. Okay, I mean, Wearsby might be reading more into it, but usually it would be no encouragement.
It doesn't sound like she gave her any instruction either.
No instruction.
It says, as it turns out.
Yeah, nothing.
She
I mean,
was in
right.
field.
I'm going to be praying for you. No
Yeah.
encouragement. Like
Or
you're so
wanna direct her
wonderful.
to-
Yeah, this is our family's
Yeah.
land. Go to our family's
Right.
land.
Yeah.
And it was just like, what is it? Something go ahead, my daughter. Okay, I was like, go ahead. It was almost like whatever. Go and do it. I'm still depressed. I'm still embittered. I'm still Mara. Okay, not Naomi, but I'm Mara now at this point. And you can take it for what it's worth. You may think that Wearsby might be overreading it, but I generally think that is not too far off the mark. And so when that happens, where does Ruth wind up at that point?
Well, she winds up in the field of Boaz.
Right.
Does she know that? I don't think she knows that.
Absolutely. I don't think that there's any
Okay.
indication that
She
it
just
is.
stopped here, so
Right.
I-
Because you'll know later in the chapter that Naomi must have not given her instruction. Remember, like, go ahead, daughter, because she was surprised when she was told this answer, okay? And so, clearly Ruth would not know, right?
Right.
And I love this part. Ruth, in the book of Ruth, there's no mention, the author, who most people think is Samuel, okay, the prophet, wrote Ruth, and but they're not sure. But there's no really mention that God did this or God did that or God did this. There are people that are talking about God, but there's not like overarching, like I'm the narrator of this book and I'm going to talk about God and see what he's doing. I really find it interesting. It says, as it turned out, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz. Someone else had another translation of that. What was it? That as it happened, or it happened to be that?
And her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz.
Yeah, like it-
Hap being happened.
Yeah, so it just happened to be, and the funny thing is, what's happening here, really, I guess, is what I'm saying. I mean,
think it's divine intervention.
yeah, I mean, if
Lord's
you,
guiding her.
I mean, it almost makes me chuckle. As it turned out, she's just happened to be in the fields of her kinsman redeemer that we'll find out in just a second, or as it happened to work out. I'm like, this is totally God's sovereignty at this point. And so Samuel doesn't have to say that. I mean, people get that exactly what's going on here, and he might have just said it kind of, with a whimsical smile. As it turned out, you're right, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. She got onto Boaz's field for all the hundreds of fields around Bethlehem at that point. And I think we need to realize that when we're in the mix, when we're in the trial at that point, we got to realize that God's in control at this point, okay? And even though he doesn't always tell you and show you exactly his sovereignty, we've got to have faith that, I don't know why I'm doing, why you're putting me through this, Lord, but, I know you're in charge, okay? And I know you're going to make sure that things are okay, as Romans 8:28 says. And remember, when we say, I just want to make sure we hit that one again, Romans 8:28, because people use that maybe more freely than maybe it's intended. 8:28. Sorry, I should have marked it. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And when the real issue of that often quoted verse, and we know that in all things God works for the good, is the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Because the good is, what's the good? Because that makes more sense. And the good, I would argue, is that which conforms us to the likeness of God. It's not $1 million. It's not, and we know that in all things God works for, the prosperity. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say the health of, it doesn't say, and you'll live a long life. And it doesn't say, and all your family members are going to be healthy and prosperous and health. That's not the good, okay? That is a nice thing. Don't get me wrong. I'm not, but the good is that which conforms us to the likeness of God. So again, and let me rephrase it. And we know that in all things God works for that which conforms us to the likeness of God, of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. That's why we go through these trials and tribulations, so that we can conform to the likeness of God. Not that he can just extract us from the bad thing and set us up like Job. Now, he can do that, and he does do that, and puts Job into an even higher prosperity level than he was before, at the beginning of Job. But Christians shouldn't. And preachers who say that, and we all know there's hucksters out there preaching that prosperity gospel, don't believe that. The good is not what people would want it to be. Don't get me wrong, I'd love for the good to be, and you'll get, all these worldly things, but really it's that which conforms us to the likeness of God. That's gonna change our hearts. That's what really it is.
More of him in us.
Absolutely. And so, let me make sure I'm on my right sheet now. Sorry about that. So that's where we are at this point, and of the first 3 verses. Any questions or comments about that? All right. So God's sovereignty. God has her right where he wants her, right? At this point. She doesn't even know it. And so let's see what happens in verse 4 through 16. Now this is kind of more focused on Boaz, so I kind of want you to think about, I want you to give me kind of a character sketch. If you can give me some adjectives for what you think, Boaz is X, through the reading of verses 4 through 16. Can someone read that for me, please?
Later, when Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, he said to the harvesters, "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they replied. Boaz asked his servant, who was in charge of the harvesters, "Whose young woman is this?" The servant answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab." She asked, "Will you let me gather fallen grain among the bundles behind the harvesters?" She came and has remained from early morning until now, except that she has rested a little in the shelter. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter, don't go and gather grain in another field, and don't leave this one, but stay here close to my female servants. See which field they are harvesting and follow them. Haven't I ordered the young men not to touch you? When you are thirsty, go and drink from the jars the young men have filled." She bowed with her face to the ground and said to him, "Why are you so kind to notice me, although I am a foreigner?" Boaz answered her, "Everything you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband's death has been fully reported to me. How you left your father and mother and the land of your birth, and how you came to a people you didn't previously know. May the Lord reward you for what you have done, and may you receive a full reward from the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." "My lord," she said, "you have been so kind to me, for you have comforted and encouraged your slave, although I am not like one of your female servants." At mealtime, Boaz told her, "Come over here and have some bread and dip it in the vinegar sauce." So she sat beside the harvesters, and he offered her roasted grain. She ate and was satisfied, and had some left over. When she got up to gather grain, Boaz ordered his young men, "Let her even gather grain among the bundles, and don't humiliate her. Pull out some stalks from the bundles for her, and leave them for her to gather. Don't rebuke her."
Okay, so a lot about Boaz, some about Ruth. Tell me what are some thoughts about Boaz as to his character and what might back that up? What do you think?
Like, he's aware, like he knows what's going on
Sure.
on his land.
Yeah, I mean, because it says in verse 1, what's he a man of? Man of standing. That's what I don't know. Is there another translation that y'all have in verse 1 of chapter 2?
Prominent man of noble character.
Prominent man of noble character. Okay, so I mean, he clearly is someone who knows how to get things done, at least. Okay, because you don't become prominent unless you are capable at that point. And we'll see the noble character too. Anything else that you can glean from him? Let's keep on. Sorry about that. Generous. Okay, why generous at this point?
Because not only did he insist that she stay within his land
Right.
for protection purposes, I'm assuming,
Yeah.
but also to tell the bundlers to pull out
Yeah.
what they've already bundled,
Like extra.
and share with her. Yeah,
I'd like
not
for you
just
to
on the
undo
staff.
what you've spent, under the hot sun and throw a little here and there, and just even more so than just the normal gleaning, which is part of the Levitical, rule, right? And so he is even more, generous than what the law even wanted him to be. He'd have been totally within God's law if he had just let it happen the way it did, but he was, he was more generous than that. Any other things that come to you?
Well, he was even more generous. He fed her.
Yeah, I was gonna say
I mean,
hospitable.
Yeah.
Brought her in and had her share his meal.
Yeah, right. So I guess this is lunchtime. I just want you to know this, okay? Because she goes out. You'll see later she's going to do more work before evening time when she goes back to Naomi, okay? But so we can consider this the mid-meal or whatever. And so they've actually prepared something because they roasted it, I guess. Roasted barley, with the wine vinegar sauces and that. And the water so it's lunch. That's not in the Levitical code at this point. And bring them in for lunch, and let them hang out with you, and all that kind of stuff. But that was Boaz at this point. Right. Now Boaz was certainly impressed. It's almost like anyone who loves the Hallmark Channel. It's almost like almost was he immediately smitten by Ruth, because you could say who's that young lady out there, or he could just have been, well, who's that young lady out there, and I don't know. I mean, if you're a romantic, think the former. If you're not, think the latter. But it clearly, we'll see how this progresses, as most of y'all already know. How did he treat his employees? So you said he was generous. Was it just with the poor and the foreigners?
No, because it looked like he was feeding all of his servants as they were working too.
Did that? How about how he speaks to us? Yeah, the Lord bless y'all. I mean, he said, "The Lord be with you," and then they said, "The Lord bless you." They know that his faith is important to him. Whether they subscribed to worshiping Yahweh, which I think most Israelites generally did, whether they were spot on or not, they said, "The Lord bless you." They called back, okay? And so it's like the boss who doesn't mind sharing his faith, and he clearly, there are bosses that I don't need to talk to the employees. I've got better things to do. I'll take care of my business and I'm going to do my stuff and they do their stuff. But it seems like, first of all, he's eating with them, his workers. He's, telling them, he's giving them blessings at this point. So I think this is a guy full of faith at this point, and they realize that, and maybe he wants faithful people working for him because they seem to utter that back to him. What else do you pick out from Boaz?
He cares about his family. I mean, he's doing all this because he investigated, well, what happened with Naomi? What, you know, it's been reported to me, well, why would it be reported to you unless you were asking?
Yeah, I would assume he knows he's part of the Elimelech's clan, right? And you knew that.
So you know
back
what
then. You knew
happens
your
to your
clan, you
Right.
knew your family, and you know that kind of stuff. So that was true there. Age-wise, would you pick up from verse 5?
Well, just the reference to, even though they said the my daughter reference was commonly used back then, but
Right.
it still kind of gave you this visual of he's much older than her.
Yeah. What does he ask his foreman?
This is a young woman.
Yeah, who's a young woman. Okay, so
And he also references later on
right.
that she could have her pick of
Right.
young men.
That's right.
And
In,
that
in
was
another chapter.
age.
Yeah, right. Right. You could have chose some young guys, but you were kind enough to put your eyes on me. And so yeah, I think he's an older, and I don't know what that means back in 14th century, 13th century, BC, Israel, but he clearly probably has 10 or 20 years at least on top of her. Okay, and so that's that.
He acknowledges the Lord, that it's the Lord that, because she has come, it's under his refuge that, she now lives.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I might have written this a little bit farther down when I was studying this, but how humble is this guy? First of all, I mean, he's basically saying he is focusing on what she's doing for Naomi, right? I mean, like, you are a solid person, he's saying to Ruth, and he says, I'm going to bless you, right? Don't we sometimes do that when we're generous with people? I'm so glad I was there to make sure that I took care of that person. Or, if I didn't do this for the church, no one would do this for the church. Or, if I didn't do this for my family, we start bean counting. No one would pick up the slack for, this or that. And he says, in verse 12, may you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. I think that's beautiful. I mean, that he realizes where the blessings are coming from, okay? Even though this is a guy, he's a prominent guy. A guy was standing, it said in verse 1. And so, yeah, I think he's a humble guy as well. Any other thoughts about Boaz?
I think he displays a lot of Christ-like character. I know Christ
Right.
isn't here yet, but
Right.
but just how so you can see Christ, in the Old Testament foreshadowing to him later. I mean, even just noticing her, who probably would have been considered the least of these. I mean, she's
Right.
a foreigner from
Right.
a sinful
Yeah.
nation.
Yeah.
She's poor.
Yeah.
She's coming to glean, but he notices her.
Yeah.
Even though he's the owner of the whole field and in charge of everything and a man of means,
Yeah.
and just takes care of her over and above
Right.
what was even required
Ye-
by the law.
Yeah, I think Ruth is one of those great books where it's the foreshadowing of Christ and us. It's the kinsman redeemer, right? And he is going to effectuate that later on in Ruth. But I mean, he's got all the resources and Ruth has zero resources. And yet he lavishes like Christ lavishes on us, and God lavishes on us, that needs, what we need at that point, and gives us more than what we need, quite frankly, at that point. And so, like the come join me for lunch, that's just grace, a grace-filled response at this point. And he's humble, and he's kind, and he's generous, and and so, yeah, this. Great point, but yeah, that's one of those kinsman redeemer things. I think scholars use that often from Ruth to show the relationship of Christ and the church, right? Or Christ and us as an individual believer.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about that? And back to God's sovereignty. What else in verse 4 shows us God's totally in control?
Boaz was out of town before.
Right, timing.
Just got right in town.
Right day, right period of, I mean, it's a guy from standing, he probably could have been at the gates of Bethlehem doing, I mean, I can imagine he would be like considered an elder. I don't know if he was technically an elder of Bethlehem, but those guys hung out at the city gates, you know, for people with their, you know, disputes with other people and contracts and all that kind of stuff, which we'll see because he goes, and I guess maybe I should I think he goes to the elders, so maybe he's not an elder, but he's certainly a guy who's a businessman who's got all kinds of stuff, all kinds of business going on. So he gets there. I mean, and on Ruth's side, she could have said, man, this is a lot. I've got enough. I'm going to go back to Naomi, and it's the middle of the morning, and I'm okay with that. Or she could have been drinking water at the shelter where he says to come have lunch, and could have totally missed it. But God is totally sovereign. He's got exactly the way he wanted it. She wound up on Boaz's land, and he got there exactly at the time that she was doing the work. You know, the other thing about Boaz is he wasn't a fake too, because his foreman, what happened when Ruth asked permission to glean off of the land? Did Boaz have to get permission?
No.
No, the foreman did.
Right.
So what does that imply at that point?
But the foreman knew that he was a man of standing and would want
Yeah.
his land used the way that God told him.
I'm sure Boaz is like, of course that's going to happen because that's what the law says.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, I'm generous too, but I'm going to follow the law too. I mean, the foreman didn't have to go for permission to Boaz. He's like, yeah, that's what my boss would want. That's what he does. So, I
That's
mean,
what I was just kind of picturing, that like that everyone who works for Boaz
Yeah.
is happy to work for
Yeah.
him. Like they're not going anywhere
Yeah.
else. They want to stay under him because of the man that he is.
Yeah.
And as long as things go, as long as the Lord bless him,
yeah,
they're going to be blessed.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Yeah, I think it's exactly right. And, you know, back to God's sovereignty, you know, people say, oh, you know, don't think for a second that you serve a distant God, okay? I mean, he is a God in the details at this point. And there are great Christians that think that God is more laissez-faire, you know, kind of like, just as long as you're following me, you can do what you want. But I think God really wants, I'm telling my kids, he's got a specific plan for you, child 1. He's got a specific plan for you, child 3. I mean, he's got specific plans that he wants you. Now, it's our duty to find out what it is. Now, can he still bless us if we don't go down what he had intended for us before, because we don't walk 100% by faith and we walk more by sight? Yeah, but I mean, he's a God that's in the details, and he orders our steps. You know, it says that. And so so you can, that might be a disputable matter, I think. You know, some people say God still loves us, but he allows us to, just as long as we're faithful, he allows us to, you know, he's okay with us to be this job or at this job, to marry this person or to marry that person. I'm not that person. I really think that he is a God of the details, and he has a plan for us, and he wants to reveal that plan to us, and we just have to be faithful enough and walk by faith to see that plan, and then to, of course, do what that plan is. Any thoughts about that? But I see that sovereignty all around. Do you think Bethlehem's a big city or a small town from where you read this?
I think it's small enough that word travels fast.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Like the foreman knew what was going on. Hey, who's this guy? Oh, that's the Moabitess that came back with Naomi, and you know, like, oh, I know the Moabitess came back with Naomi. Because I mean, he has the whole story when she says, "Why are you so kind to me?" And he says, "Because you're the Moabitess that came back with Naomi. And we all know about you." And so, you know, it's one of those. You know, and I'm sure a lot of people are like, I got to get out of this small town. You know, in wherever.
At the water hole.
Yeah, right. But you know, and thank goodness that the foreman saw fit to still. He didn't say, well, Boaz may not want this, so I'm not, this foreigner who's a Moabitess. But so at least the foreman got it right. Boaz got it right. I'd like to think other people get it right. Now, don't get me wrong. People love Naomi, and so there was some of that grace extended through, but yeah, I think it's a small town here at this point.
And especially knowing how they felt about Moabites.
Right.
I mean, this just wasn't any form.
Yeah.
This was a hard and fast. We aren't even supposed to be having anything to do with them.
And that was
the grace that they showed her.
Yeah. And I think that's the general thing about Judaism. I don't know if it was as evangelical as like Southern Baptists are, or as like Christianity is today, but they did not have a problem if you wanted to come into their. Now it was like this: you want to come at West Hampton, come into our church, and we'll take care of you. But we're not going to necessarily go out and evangelize the community, okay?
Right.
But if you want, we'll love you at
You're
this
welcome.
point. And
Yes.
so that's how they picked up proselytes. And so that's how they had people join, like Rahab, like Ruth. Okay, so they didn't have a problem with those that wanted to join worshiping Yahweh at that point. But I didn't get the feeling that they sought people out at that
Right.
point. If it worked out, great. You want to join us, that's fine. But we're not gonna go and go to the four corners.
And as a
Jesus
general rule-
Jesus changed that with the Great Commission at that
Yeah,
point.
but even in Old Testament, as a general rule, you see, in most cases, they're elated
Right.
that they've come to
Yeah.
the faith and the belief in God and to leave
Right.
what they were doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just, that was one of the things in reading Wearsby and reflecting back on it, it was like, wow, to know how they felt about Moabites, and that was never mentioned to her
Yeah.
in any of what we're told.
Yeah.
Well, but it was also reported to them how she had treated Naomi.
Mm-hmm.
So this was one who had treated our family
Right.
well.
She's good to our
She had
folks.
taken care of our family.
Yeah.
She stuck by our family, so we're going to stick by her.
She's got some street cred.
Yeah.
So, and so that's where it is. And then Boaz goes over the top, is effusive in his praise to her, not thinking about what he's doing for her, and yet, he gives the glory to God at this point. And then, of course, then invites her to lunch. They share the prepared meal, which is the roasted grain, I guess. Maybe they did it right then over the fire. I don't know how you roast barley, but anyways, that's where it is. And then she allowed her to continue on that whole day, and it was even on the the enhanced plan of throwing the stalks out so that she could pick that up. Any questions for verses 4 through 16 then? Okay. And I guess, what Jim, okay, that's a great story. How is our generosity? Okay, and I mean, because she didn't deserve this, okay? And there's a lot of grace coming from Boaz to Ruth. I mean, yeah, he had to follow the law at this point, but we already talked about that this was more than that. And someone who could be, that they could, have prejudice for, because she had come from, I mean, how could you have done that? How can you have been part of the Moab culture and that kind of stuff? So, I could have understood that as well. And I guess the great question is, as Christians, how generous are we? Even to those who have made bad choices in their lives. And you could say, I'm not gonna be that generous with you because you've done X, Y, and Z, and you're where you are because you made those poor choices. And I think we have to remember Boaz and Ruth when we decide how generous we want to be with people, even if they don't deserve it. Just like by law, she didn't deserve any more than what, but he did above and beyond that at this point. And as much as we don't deserve, Jesus died on the cross for us, right? Any thoughts about that? All right. Let's finish up the last few, 17 through 23. If we could, if someone could finish us up from chapter 2, 17 through 23.
So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah.
Sure. Ephah.
She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabite said, He even said to me, stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work with him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. So Ruth stayed close to the woman of Boaz to glean until barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
Yeah, you have to remember this is the time of the judges, so you're like, how is this, like women, I assume, being assaulted to some extent, if you're in someone else's field, even though the Levitical, law said to do that. But again, it's the time of the judges. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on there, all kinds of pagan worship and people just generally not following Yahweh, not following the Levitical code at this point. And so, I mean, just like, anywhere in our community, I mean, you can go to one door and you get, the person that will, give their shirt off to you and the other person that'll take the shirt from you.
Yeah.
That's, thank goodness for people like Boaz, right? And so, how did the day end with Ruth? What did she do? She gleaned from the field until evening, then what did she do?
She went back to Naomi.
What did she do first,
She
though?
threshed.
She threshed. Okay, remembering, you're like, oh, okay, that's what you're talking about, Jim. And so she went up to the threshing floor, I guess. I imagine she went up there and she started beating it. Probably didn't have the oxen or anything like that, or cattle or whatever. And so she had this threshing tool. They called it the threshing sledge. And she actually did her own beating of the, to separate the straw from the barley at this point. Now you're like, well, Jim doesn't say that she winnowed it, anything when you throw it up in the air and the chaff and the straw blows away. But a lot of times once you pick up the barley, and we're not talking, and remember this was agricultural in the way of they probably sold the barley, right? Because they were doing so much. This was just human consumption. So correct me if I'm wrong, at least I know with wheat, so I'm going to assume barley is a little bit of the same. If you rub the wheat together, it already separates the wheat from the chaff, right? And the stuff will fluff off and that kind of stuff, and then you have the edible wheat at that point. So she and Naomi could do the winnowing
By hand.
at her house, or whether they're drinking water and just talking about the day at that point. Yeah, probably something like that. And so wheat expert that I am, barley expert. But that's what it. But she even went in and threshed her own her own stuff at that point. And so she threshed. Then she went to Naomi at this point.
Hold on, first, the whole ephah
Yeah.
is 30 pounds.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a lot.
So Wiersbe said it was enough for two ladies to eat for like a whole week. That's a lot of food, 30 pounds. I'm just trying to think how much, but yeah, so they were set for a whole week at this point. And so what was Naomi's response?
Where did you go? Where did this come from?
Right.
Well, and she had given her a leftover, so she sees that Ruth had been fed
Right.
generously.
Oh yeah, and Ruth's a
Yeah.
good steward, right? Just like Jim would save the lunch to his Taco Bell and wrap it back to take it back to the house too. You're like, I'm not letting this go to waste. And so yeah, some of the roasted barley and whatever else that was dipped in the wine vinegar or whatever, and took that back. So they were eating the rest of the lunch, and they had the ephah, which took care of them for about a week or so. And so they were loving life at this point. And the funny thing is, they were so thrilled. I thought to myself, how ungrateful is our society? These folks were just thrilled beyond belief. They had food to eat for the rest of the week. We don't even think about that these days, right? I mean, this is a society where it's a daily, where's my food? How am I going to drink clean water? That kind of stuff, and all of the effort that goes into it. And we're complaining about,
Something not being.
relatively speaking, not important to that, and so,
I mean, not only that, how many things are you eating with barley? You're going to grind it up and you can make a rough flour
right,
for a bread. And then you're probably going to put it in some water or something as a stew or
Right.
stew.
yeah,
Okay, so you got bread, you got soup, and that's what you're eating all week.
And also,
Yeah.
Can you imagine
drink
telling our
all of it.
kids,
yeah,
you're going to get bread and you get barley soup?
right.
all week.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you're gonna like it. This is what we did when I was.
But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. you're
Yeah,
right.
no fruits, no vegetables, you
No
know, I'm
variety,
not saying that
exactly.
there wasn't anything that they could do to get that, but I mean, this was the staple,
The
right?
staple.
And so, especially during that season of the year at this
And
point.
they were wonderful over it. I mean,
They were. In fact, what did Naomi say that may make you think that she may have turned the corner here from being named Mara, which means bitter?
Blessed be the man
Mhm.
to whom the sin.
Okay, so now at this point she's talking more about what God, you
She
know,
sounds more like herself.
that sounds more like Naomi,
Yeah.
pleasant, right? At this point. So God, I hope God blesses that man who took notice of you. And then what's Ruth's response?
His name is
It's Boaz, you know, and ding, 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 ding. And then it's interesting. Wiersbe, my Bible is just like Mandy's. It says, "The Lord bless him," Naomi said. And it looks like it's only talking about Boaz. To her daughter-in-law, "He has not stopped showing the kindness to the living and the dead," she added. "That man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsmen redeemers at this point." Does anyone have a different translation than that?
guardian redeemers. is
Right, but I mean even
Okay.
before that, because Wiersbe says not only is she saying to bless the Lord bless him in verse 20, and then she says that she's talking about God blessing her, and I'm like, well, that doesn't sound that right.
Mine kind of does.
Okay.
It says, "May he be blessed by the Lord, comma,
Right.
who has not forsaken his kindness to the living or the dead."
Yeah.
So it's
That's
referring
what
to
mine
the
says.
Lord rather than
So-
the man himself.
In my nerd self, I have this book that says the Complete Jewish Bible. And so I had to pull that off when I was studying this and go to this verse, and it says, in fact, just what that is, that the Lord bless, or I hope that he is blessed by Adonai, the Lord, right? Who has not stopped showing his kindness to the. So it's just the shifting of the words. So Wiersbe, if you're taking that one, and at least now, odd that the NIV doesn't do that because it says others. So I don't know if she's speaking only about Boaz when it says he's still taking care of the living and the dead, but that's a pretty broad brushstroke statement. I mean, I guess Boaz is taking care of Elimelech's family and thereby taking care of Elimelech who died, so he's taking care of the living and the dead. So I think it passes the blush test both ways, right? But Wiersbe said, not only is now Naomi saying bless Boaz, but she's also praising God at this point, praising the Lord, and so I like Wiersbe's part. You can take whatever interpretation that you want, but that was the difference in the way that the words were phrased at this point. But it looks like what? She's turned the
definitely
corner.
Turned the corner.
Yeah.
She's back to her same old self.
I'm going to stop there. Okay, we'll talk about kinsman redeemer and all that meant.
Next week.
But realize this. Well, this is my last point to us as believers. It's amazing what one faithful believer can do for the countenance of everyone, right? Mm-hmm. If you see someone going to town at church, don't you want to be just like that person and say, I love that person's, demeanor and their Christ-likeness, and I want to be more like that person. And on the flip side, you can say the same thing when someone's not being faithful. But look what Ruth's, and by extension Boaz's, actions have done just for Naomi. Have turned her around from Mara back to Naomi at this point, from bitter to pleasant. And I think that when we say, no one else at church is doing that, I can't. I'm not going to be able to do that all by myself. Or no one at work is. I'm getting all this flack. That I'm too much like. I'm saying too much about the Bible, or I have too many things on my wall that reference God, or I say things that sound spiritual in nature, and people roll their eyes. And all I can say is, it only takes one person, okay? And you might have a Naomi that's just waiting for you to be faithful, okay, and to change their bitterness into, loving Jesus, okay? So don't get me wrong, we've all been there and felt like we're the last faithful ones in a certain environment, but God says, I'll be there. I'm sovereign. I'll put the right people in your field at the right time, and you can bless them, and they can, and we can turn things around. Okay, not everyone, but we can turn people around. So I just wanted to give you that encouragement. All right, let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for this day and the blessings that you give us. Thank you so much for Ruth and Boaz, Lord, and how they followed you, Lord. Forgive us when we fail to serve you, Lord. Forgive us when we're not generous to others, even if we think they don't deserve it, and when we don't go the second mile for them. Lord, forgive us when we fail to set the right example for other believers, whether it's our children or our family or our co-workers, Lord, or even church members, Lord. And give us that strength to carry on, even if it feels like we're the only ones there to do it for you, Lord, because we know you'll bless us. And we love you so much. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.